Hi everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live webinar. My name is Philip Eidson, and I'm the Managing Director and Founder here at Art of Procurement. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're actually going to do something a little bit different. We're going to fit as much insight, inspiration, actionable content into 30 minutes as we possibly can. And we're going to be doing that on the topic of generative AI and the future of procurement. We're going to be talking about how fast things are changing, and they're changing, it seems, by the day, how procurement will need to evolve, and importantly, some real life use cases, which I think is something that we're all kind of looking to learn more from so we can reimagine what procurement can do and how that can be enabled by generative AI. Now, before I introduce my guests who are sitting patiently on the stage along with me, I just wanted to share a couple of logistics issues. So we don't have any slides today. It's all about questions. So I just welcome and encourage you to put any comments, any questions that you might have in the chat. You can see that on the right-hand side of the window if you're watching this on a desktop. We may not be able to get to all the questions today given the time we have, but I'm really, really interested to kind of understand what's on your mind, because that's really going to help us as we think about how can we help kind of bring content to you that is going to be really helpful as you're continuing to explore this generative AI journey. So please don't be shy in the comments, and my co-partner at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barner, is going to be hanging out in the chat there as well to communicate with you. We also have a couple of resources. They've been pinned to the top of that chat window that you might download, that you can download at any time, and that might actually answer any questions that we're not really able to get to today. So you'll see a white paper, which is From Aspiration to Application, Embracing and Enabling Procurement's AI-Driven Future, and a data sheet on Ivalua's Intelligent Virtual Assistant. So you'll see those rotating in the chat. All right, well, with that said, I want to introduce you to our guest today. So I'm joined by Sushil Srinivasan. Sushil is Managing Director for Supply Chain and Operations in the Sourcing and Procurement area at Accenture. So Sushil, thank you for joining us. I'm also joined by Chris Sawchuk. Chris is Principal and Global Procurement Advisory Practice Leader at Hackett Group, and great to see you again, Chris.
Yes, same here.
And also by Pascal Bensoussan, who's Chief Product Officer at Ivalua. Pascal, nice
Hi,
to
everyone.
welcome you, and hopefully I didn't butcher your surname too badly there.
No, thanks for having me.
That's the one thing that makes me the most nervous of any of the, whenever we're doing these sessions. So Pascal, I'm going to actually start with a question to you, and we're going to jump straight into this topic of use cases. I wonder if you could share an example of a compelling but straightforward use case for generative AI in procurement.
Yes, and I'll be brief. We discussed that yesterday, and we always discuss it because starting with concrete use cases is the first and foremost thing that everyone needs to keep and have in mind. And so just to make it very concrete, one of the use cases that I love, we have tens of use cases, dozens of use cases already. But the one that I really like is the one that helps extract risks and summarize contracts, agreements with procurement agreements ahead of validations and approval from different approvers. Really important, particularly when you want to know the key insights, the key highlights of a contract. You need to know what is it about, the key terms, and where you need to focus as a buyer in terms of kind of the risks and the obligations that are embedded in the contract language. And generative AI can do that very well for you in a short, brief format that provides a great starting point for approval.
And for that risk perspective, I mean, Chris, do you see that, because you do a lot of surveys on the procurement profession and CPOs, and are you seeing that there's more and more kind of push towards procurement as a risk organization as much as just a savings organization, and therefore looking to use cases such as risk management from generative AI to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. If we went back, several years ago, prior to, I would say, the pandemic, the whole COVID-19 era, one of the studies you're familiar with, Phil, is our annual key issue study. And we look at the priorities of supply management executives. And if we went back before, 2020, what you would have seen is a period of time that we didn't necessarily see risk as a top 10 priority for
Right.
organizations. It wasn't that it wasn't there, but it never made it above sort of that average watermark, within the priority schema of organizations to really be a priority. And what COVID did for us was really to open the kimono and really expose a lot of these vulnerabilities that we have, within our supply chains, really from a supply assurance perspective. But what we have learned over a period of time is that there's much more risk other than that. Risk is very broad. We have IP risk, we have reputational risk, we have risk in so many different ways it manifests itself. And today, when we look at those priorities of supply management executives, risk is very elevated as one of those top 10 priorities. We have not seen it sort of fall off. And, in the current environment, we're actually seeing it being elevated and some of that concern coming back, similar to what we saw, earlier in 2020 and 2021, based on some of the uncertainty around some of the geopolitical, I'll call them hotspots around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that because, I think that it's a generational focus, for procurement, for supply chain to be really refocusing on risk. And it's interesting that as the impact of COVID kind of decreased, that the risk didn't decrease with it, the focus on, because previously you have a risk event, we're kind of late to the party, everyone's moved on, you forget about risk until you have the next risk event. Sushil, I wonder if from your perspective, you're working with a variety of different clients every day. Do you see certain areas of demand in generative AI and kind of starting points that are maybe consistent across the procurement organizations that you work with?
Definitely. So very rightly put by Christoph that in the last decade, procurement was focused on only cost savings. Post-pandemic, the expectation has changed from procurement for a 360-degree value where they have to contribute being the best friends of the sustainability officer, identifying the right sustainable suppliers that are there. They have to help IT with sourcing the right terms and conditions and contracting of the AI platform that they are going to source, whether with the right LLM terms and conditions. So they have to be the best friends of that. On top of it, they have to do their category strategies, and it has to be more accelerated, where I see Gen AI playing three things. It's going to be an advisory for them to help them accelerate their own process. It is going to augment them in terms of the right chatbots and interactions, in terms of the touch points with the requester, with suppliers, to accelerate the administrative work that is there. And it is going to automate certain elements so that compliance by design happens, your cycle time improves. And that's where we see a bit of reimagination is the key word for using Gen AI in procurement. And this is a decade for procurement to be having the right place in the C-suite. I'm pretty sure the CPOs are looking into this.
Chris, just to build on something that Pascal was saying about contracts as being a use case and extracting risk elements as part of that. What's it going to take for procurement, in your kind of opinion, to actually trust generative AI enough to commit to getting help with something like contracts or, other critical kind of areas where you kind of can trust what the generative AI can do, as opposed to right now, I think that's more around the experimentation.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to look at the term trust. And, I think most of us understand that trust is earned over time. When we go in and you just engage with other people, you don't, in a first interaction, just say, well, I trust you now. And so it's earned over time. And so, there's a term out there organizations use as human in the loop, right? So if we engage, in an AI/generative AI kind of environment, we're seeing the results come out of there. And one of the things that we're doing today is we're using humans to look at and validate the results that are coming out.
Yeah. And,
over time, the accuracy of that information will get better over time. And this is where I say, trust is earned over time. As we see less and less errors, some organizations use it where you get to a point where 99.9% of the time, what's coming out of that does not need any modification from the human in the loop.
Yeah.
You get to a point to say, maybe it's a time to cut that connection, and we don't have a human in the loop. And to me, that's trust that's earned over time within these particular systems.
So you kind of take an iterative approach over time, and
Yeah.
kind of the level of human interaction with that as you get more confident in the insights or the information that it's presenting. Pascal, how do you think about that from a product perspective? Like, how do you build trust into the product so that you are so that when people are using it, they're not thinking, is this right? Or I have to go and sanity check it, or I have to go and do it manually as well. So there is trust in the system.
Well, it's a great question, Philip. I think the answer really lies into transparency, and making sure that as you use the system, first you know what's going on. You know what data is being leveraged. You know what the the generative AI request is doing. We call it prompt, which is how you ask a large language model for a specific question. And then the large language model, or the response from Eva, in our case, is very clear in terms of what information it found, either on the internet or within a document or within the database or just on the page in front of you as a user, what information it found and where the statement that it makes come from. So I think that level of transparency is important.
Yeah.
As Chris says, I think it's also earned over time. I think some generations, I'm thinking younger folks, are more inclined to use technology and kind of throw themselves
more trusting
and trust technology out of the bat. And I think experience will matter in terms of using it and figuring out the contour where and the scenarios where you have to use it just as a tool, where it is you shouldn't just follow blindly the advice. It just remains a tool in your hands to think, to still think critically about your job and what you're doing. And when you can just automate a process, as Sushil said, because at that point it becomes very programmatic in its ability to write some code, write to a database, do tasks that are more mundane and maybe don't require as much thinking as you need.
Right. Sushil, do you see it impacting how procurement actually interacts with other areas, other functions within the business as we start using generative AI more extensively, and perhaps then changing the experience of working with procurement?
Sure. It is important to know the ping pong that happens in the entire supply chain network, where procurement is always collaborating and coordinating with the requester, educating them time and again, educating the suppliers time and again on the process and following the process. So this is where we see Gen AI playing the intervention in terms of if the policies and procedures of an organization are fed into the LLM, and LLM can make a guided sourcing process in terms of the right requisition is coming, so that the speed to launch the RFPs are faster. Second is in the sourcing and contracting process, it can be accelerated, selecting the right RFP, running the autonomous negotiation, doing in terms of selecting the right contract template, because you are interacting with legal. Many times the ping pong happens that as a procurement guy, you've done all the negotiations, but you've used the wrong template, not the legal approved. So it can all be done first time right by compliance by design on the first mode that can happen. On the requisition to pay part and the payment status, suppliers are always asking, what is about the status of my invoice? What happened? And that's a lot of escalations. All this can be controlled and managed through training the LLM in terms of searching the information and feeding it. In the absence of a Gen AI or an automation, what would happen? The escalation would come to procurement, the services would be stopped by the supplier, you would coordinate with finance, coordinate with the end user, get the acknowledgement done and done. So all this alerts in terms of acknowledgements, work confirmation, all can happen through the platform, and procurement can focus on the strategic stakeholder collaboration and developing the right strategies in this way.
Yeah, you bring a lot more transparency to how folks within the organization interact with procurement, which is often one of the things that's leveled of us as being a black box where you can't, you don't really know what's going on, and we're not often as responsive as what stakeholders would like because of the amount of things that we've got on our plate to help them kind of see inside where statuses are of a variety of different things. Now, Chris, when you think about use cases, you're of course talking to folks all the time about procurement transformation and organization design. Are there any areas that stand out for you where there is a lot of interest, or where there's been some successful implementations of generative AI in the last year or so?
It's interesting. I go back to the study that I mentioned earlier on the first question that you asked me, and I mentioned a study that we've been doing for a long time, and it's our key issue study. And this year we asked a few questions around generative AI, and one of the things we were just trying to determine is where organizations are. Are they exploring it? Are they doing anything with it, et cetera? And it was interesting. This was about 6 months ago. So, you go back 6 months ago, and it was about a 50-50. 50% of the organizations really weren't doing much of anything, and 50% were actually, exploring.
Yeah.
But the second question we asked them is that, where do you feel the greatest impact will be when you look at all of these various activities that we do in supply management? Where do you believe the biggest impact might be of generative AI specifically? Number one was spend analytics.
Yeah.
Number two was contract lifecycle management. And what it did is that you just look at all of these activities. I believe we gave them a list of maybe 30 different types of activities and processes that you find in supply management. Now, the thing that was also interesting about this is we asked them, do you believe that it will have an impact in these areas? And when we look at contract lifecycle management, which is one of the areas I believe is ripe and will have some of the biggest impact, not just at a contract by contract level, but looking at it across, all contracts. For example, looking at, we have a natural hazard that occurs in a part of the world. And we ask ourselves, what suppliers are in that part of the world and were impacted by that natural hazard? Could be an earthquake, could be a volcano, whatever it is, a hurricane. And then once we understand that, what's in those contracts that protect us, in terms of our supply and our revenue as an organization? If we went back, and even today that's difficult to do, but these are things that we can look at across the overall population of all of that unstructured data within contracts and try to structure it. Yeah. So there's huge opportunities there. But the last thing I would say is that when we asked organizations, which areas do they believe that generative AI would have an impact? The thing that was interesting to me, and it was a hidden insight, was that none of them were at 100%. Mm-hmm. When you look at contract lifecycle management, we know that absolutely it will have an impact on contract lifecycle management. But we had that was the second highest area. It was about 60% of the organization. So what it really told us is that we're really in that exploratory phase where we're just learning what generative AI can do and the impact it might have on all of the activities that we do in supply management.
Mm-hmm. And Pascal, how do you balance that as well in terms of there's understanding and recognizing that generative AI can help when it comes to contract management, risk related to contracts? We talked about that before. But where do you think about starting? Like, you think about use cases that are going to be the biggest impact use cases versus perhaps nice to have use cases. How did you think about that as you built the product to implement generative AI into kind of that process?
Well, that's a good question. Well, we knew very quickly when generative AI came out that it would be very disruptive, that it would be hungry for data. That means at the end of the day, it's, as I said, it's a calculator of words. So it takes a lot of input and it creates new input based on words. But it has become a calculator of pixels, of sound, of words, multimodal. Mm-hmm. So the number of use cases had to be is open, meaning as we learn, there's going to be new use cases every day. So one thing that was really important in our design from a product perspective is to open up the platform to our partners, our configurators, because we knew that use cases would come outside of Ivalua, not limited to Ivalua R&D or Ivalua professional services. It would happen really with our customers, with our partners. So we leverage our unified platform, our unified data model to really create a no-code configuration of EVA and generative AI that allows any configurator to take data on the screen in the database, in documents, any documents, and then create requests. So when you have that in mind, and you can say, so what are the use cases? And you say there's a lot of them, and we came out with about 12 use cases every day. I have new use cases. If I was to think about how to group them overall, I would say there are use cases that are really about content creation, and those are the easiest one to start with. They are the most obvious, like help me write an email for my suppliers. I need to announce an event, a change of policy, regulation, change in my organization, and so on. Or I need to write an RFP, and I need best practices and help writing it correctly with all the right data. That's kind of the easy starting point. We talked about document analysis, like contract, but it's not just contract. It can be an ESG document from a supplier, a certification. It can be a product sheet from a supplier. It can be the content of an RFP proposal. That's about analyzing documents. And you can ask a lot of questions. Things like, what are the inconsistencies in that document? What are the level of risk? Is it compliant with my policies? Compare this with my own policies. You can just be very creative in the questions you ask and start fine-tuning the prompt to make it work. The third area is connecting a large language model with internet, where you try to ground the response of the LLM with real-time internet data to do market intelligence, to do supplier enrichment, where you really need to get data outside of what the LLM has been trained on in real time and make sense of that data. And that, I think, will go pretty far in terms of crawling the web, finding detailed information. Think of it as documents on steroids, where you're using all the documents available on the internet. And the last one is process automation, where you're using the coding ability of a large language model to create a contract, to create purchase requisition for you, knowing a number of data elements, potentially asking clarifying questions to the end user, and doing it automatically. Think intake management. Think a chatbot that can help you accomplish automatically, respond to your question on the fly. Think voice, where you can interact with voice on your mobile device.
So as you think, just to follow up on that, Pascal, as you think about all the different use cases, for organizations who are thinking, how do I use generative AI? Are there off-the-shelf solutions, or is it that we have to kind of architect and solution use cases that are very specific to each organization based on how they are set up?
So I think some of the use cases I just mentioned are the good ones to start with. I think I call them the canonical use cases. It's the ones that you get your hands on first to learn what can be done, to develop that intuition as to how to prompt a large language model, but at the end of the day, it's a new form of programming that only uses natural language. So you don't need anymore to learn to write code, to write C#, Java, or other types of code. You just need to talk and write in a very articulated fashion. It's hard. It's not easy. But I think configurators and partners and people who are translating the need of a business into a use case will know how to do that very well. And there is a lot of ways to test it and iterate on the prompt to kind of get a very stable, very strong solution. And the evolution of large language models getting stronger, getting better over time makes this whole process a lot easier.
We had a question that came in. We've got a lot of different questions. I just wanted to bring this one in. Sushil, to ask you, Don asked a question around Canadian presenters cite actual savings that can be used to create an ROI to invest in Gen AI. And so really reframing that a little bit, what is the business case, or what kind of business cases have you seen for investment in generative AI?
Primarily, this is an opportunity that Gen AI should not be treated as a technology project, but it's an opportunity to reimagine your operating model. So when you're reimagining your operating model, the foundation is your data foundation, as well as looking into the organization, how you want to build in terms of capabilities that are there. Once you're driving in terms of the savings on the value that you're generating from a classic category management, strategic sourcing type, that can automatically feed along with the sizing or the organization that you're determining as which are the candidates for going to Gen AI. You're already designing it in that way. That might be in transition period, but in the end state, you would get a lot of benefits in terms of there are going to be processes that are going to be replaced with automation. There are going to be processes where you're going to augment, especially the middle office, as we call, in terms of the intelligence, the insights that are going to be there to drive negotiations, to drive category strategies. And then there's going to be an advisory space where it is also going to provide a lot of intelligence where you are able to use it and then you determine and coach the LLM to do it. The important thing in reimagination is you are going to have a new virtual co-pilot within your organization procurement function. So you can focus, and that is going to be your virtual assistant. So you have to remember the core procurement activities you are going to do, but this virtual assistant is going to help you with the administrative, and eventually it is going to evolve. That's how I anticipate it in terms of building the business case and driving in terms of 3 dimensions: automation, augmentation, and advisory.
Chris, I just wonder if you have anything to add on what you see in terms of building those business cases as well. And it sounds like it's a much broader kind of, you're going to take a much broader perspective on the impact and the downstream cost impact of the business case, as opposed to I'm going to save 3% more, from a old kind of school procurement cost savings perspective thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I agree with what Sushil highlighted. We put out some research. I think it was at the tail end of last year, where we went through not just procurement but other functional areas as well. And one of the things that you can look at and ask yourself to say, if we're looking at generative AI, and if we look at the various activities that a supply management organization is involved in, what will be that impact over time? And we know, as you look at these activities, that some of the activities that we are doing today will be impacted by generative AI. Mm-hmm. And we estimate that impact on the staffing levels of organizations to be 46% over the next 5 to 7 years. Now, it varies based on the functional area. Some of the impact in procurement is a bit delayed versus what we're seeing in some of the other functional areas. Now, the question is what do you do with that? Yeah. And you really have a choice. You can decide that we're just not going to do those activities anymore, and I'm going to take 46% out of my organization on a go-forward basis. You got another say, well, we're going to repurpose individuals, right? Yes, we freed up 46%, but we're going to repurpose them to do something different. Mm-hmm. Our perspective is that most organizations will probably do a hybrid of both of these. They will take some of those costs as a result of some of this automation. At the same time, they will repurpose individuals. But then that leads you to other things that we have to go through. And that's when you start looking at those individuals. One of the things I always talk about is you think about these business cases is that it has an impact on the people. We highlighted the impact and the necessity of data and how we have to ready that data infrastructure and the data sources that we have as an organization to make generative AI and AI more valuable to our organization, ensuring the accuracy of it, et cetera. But at the same time, we have to ready our human capital within the organization as well. Yeah. We will have, as Sushil described, a virtual or digital assistants, which you can look at as other, capital within the organization. But those human capital that we have will have to be repurposed in a way, they have to be trained with new skills, et cetera, to participate in this new environment that we're creating. Sushil highlighted, this future is that it's an opportunity for us to step back and really reimagine, what is supply management? Yeah. How do we do it on a go-forward basis? And that includes our human capital as well. So to answer your question on the business case, yeah, I think some of the headcount area can be very quantified. The other areas is going to be a little bit more challenging as we start thinking about what that is, but there will be impact.
Now I know it's about time to wrap up, but I do want to ask one more question. Pascal, I want to ask this question to you before we do wrap up today's conversation. So in the Love Procurement podcast that we produce in partnership with Ivalua, there was an episode that you spoke on about generative AI being a company-wide initiative. So should we be thinking about this as procurement, or should we be thinking about this as, how we interact with the rest of the organization as we think about the use of generative AI, rather than kind of doing it on our own?
Yeah, it's also a good question. I think there will be a number of use cases that really come from procurement and from procurement experts, professionals who know better than anyone else what they would like to do with generative AI, and maybe more importantly, what they can do with generative AI, proven by enough experience running those use cases. From a technology perspective, I do believe that most organizations will be deploying their own large language model. And when I say their own, it will be hosted wherever they want to host it, whether it's on any public cloud or on their own on-premise, on their own cloud, using open source large language models like Llama 3. Or using Anthropic Claude or Gemini from Google or OpenAI GPT models. But I think they will develop their own LLM, potentially fine-tune their own LLM with their data, definitely feed those LLMs with their own kind of private library of documents. We call it RAG or retrieval augmented generation, because they will want that LLM to be aware of my internal policy, my IP, anything that is really important to kind of manage across department and organizations. And so that's why we actually built our capability with enough orchestration between the application of what the end user sees within Ivalua and ultimately the large language model, so that if one of our customers wants to say, hey, can you point your service, your orchestration to my large language model, we can do it easily. It's just pointing it to a different calculator, a different tool. At that point, the LLM becomes a tool. And I think it's really important to have that open perspective, because I do believe that as much as procurement can bring a lot of initiative, creativity, very practical and concrete use cases, I think ultimately the technology will be owned by IT and will be transversal and across all departments.
And so important to partner with those areas of the organization to make sure that you're working in, you're not doing something on your own now, which is going to be to the detriment of a bigger picture that the organization is working in, and how what you're doing connects in with that LLM that your organization has selected or has built internally as the private model. Well, I know that it's. We promised at the beginning we would try and touch off as much as we possibly could in 30 minutes. We a couple of minutes over that, but not too bad. So I want to, first of all, thank everyone for joining us. I want to just remind you, if we haven't answered your questions, I know we had a lot of questions in the chat. There are 2 downloads that are available. They're rotating at the top of the chat. So that's Embracing and Enabling Procurement's AI-Driven Future, and information about Ivalua's Intelligent Virtual Assistant. Also a reminder that Ivalua Now is taking place on May 22nd and 23rd, both live here in Florida, in Miami, but also virtually. So if you just click on the link that's come up on your stage, that's going to take you to the page so you can see more about that and how to register. So with all that being said, Pascal, Sushil, and Chris, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and take care.